Hello everyone. By the time you're watching this video, you should have already read the welcome letter, which will take you about 2 minutes. Watch the welcome video, which is 20 minutes long, but it's greatly helpful. There's a lot of important and detailed information in there. You need to make sure you've gone through that and hopefully read the chapter and maybe not required, but maybe gone through the Learn Smarts and take the Learn Smarts quiz, which will make this a lot simpler. Either way, make sure you've done all those things prior to our first class on 9-1. So the first video is going to be quite short. I'm going to do it in sections. There are technically 7 sections in chapter 1 for the first chapter of our text from McKinley Text 3rd edition that you're going through McGraw-Hill online for online access. If you have the physical version, I love the physical version because I have it as well. I like to do it through the physical version more than the online one, but obviously you need the online one. The physical text is an option. Okay. That said, there are 7 sections, chapter 1. First section is very short. This will be a quick video for you to go back and review as much as is necessary, other than just reading the text and doing the McGraw-Hill work. That being said, you should be able to do after this first section, and every ongoing section has learning objectives. You should be able to describe the science of anatomy. You should be able to list the subdivisions in both microscopic and gross anatomy. You should be able to describe the science of physiology and list the subdivisions of physiology. Okay. And as far as anatomy goes, anatomy and physiology, this course, anatomy studies the form and structure of the body. Physically, what you can see, palpate, hear, observe, what you can observe, right? Location, where something is. But in terms of function and what it does, that is physiology. Okay? And form and function are interrelated. That is referred to as the principle of complementarity. Okay? Complementarity of form and function, that is essentially the interrelationship of anatomy and physiology. Okay? And when talking about anatomy and physiology, we are going to be engaging the scientific method, which is not unusual for you, something you've looked at through chemistry and biology and in physics. It refers to a systematic, rigorous process by which scientists first examine natural events through observation, which you think from a life perspective, not just from a class perspective or work perspective. That's important in life, to be able to examine natural events through observation. If you think about life as we know it now, with the COVID pandemic and social challenges we face, that's a skill that can be passed on to your life beyond classwork and schoolwork and eventual work, but life, right? Developing a hypothesis for explaining a phenomenon. Again, helpful not only in work, but in how we perceive and interact in life as well. Developing an idea based upon what we see as to a rationale as to why things occur in the way that they do. Experimenting and testing that hypothesis by collecting data. We really should never be stopping collecting data. There's an opportunity to get data. We have to determine if it's repeat data. We've seen this data before, but if it's repeating, it's giving us more of an idea that something does seem to be true in either most or all cases as far as what we've observed, as opposed to being something that never changes. There are a few things in life that are always going to happen the same way, as we should know by now. And of course, at the end of that, determine if the data supports the hypothesis or if the hypothesis should be rejected or modified. I think a caveat that also should be added to that, it's not part of the scientific method, but how we apply the scientific method is the idea that, okay, we've got our data, we've developed that hypothesis after observing, we've actually experimented and tested the hypothesis through getting more and more data, and then observed and evaluated, synthesized, analyzed the data to make determination over what we get from that data, but then realizing that data shouldn't stop collecting, it should continue to go past our initial determination of our formation of our hypothesis. And we have to always be looking for the possibility, should we reject it or modify it over time? It doesn't stop, it never ends. There's not an absolute. In rare cases, I should say, would there ever be an absolute. Microscopic anatomy examines structures that cannot be observed by the unaided eye. Atoms, molecules, what we refer to as ions, that being said, also organelles, okay? They're specimens that must be examined under a microscope to see them. The divisions of our microscopic anatomy are cytology, which is the study of body cells and their internal structure, and histology, the study of tissues, okay? Gross anatomy or macroscopic anatomy, much bigger picture, investigates the structures visible to the unaided eye. What we can't see. That said, it's specimens dissected for examination. We have our systemic anatomy of each system, regional anatomy, which is related to the structural region of the body, where in the body we're actually looking. Okay, surface anatomy, which you can see on superficial anatomic markings. Comparative anatomy, examining anatomical similarities between like a human and an animal, or different animals, different species. And embryology, which is basically developmental changes from conception to birth, right? And as far as diagnosis or research, pathologic anatomy examines macroscopic and microscopic anatomic changes resulting from disease. And radiographic anatomy investigates the internal structures that are visualized by scanning procedures. And a lot of this you'll see right from the beginning here is a lot of, I don't want to say memorization, but drawing connections to these terms so you know these terms, because you need to know these terms. May take some repetition, but the more you see interrelationships, the definitions come easier, the concepts come easier. And of course, in anatomy and studying form, we want to be doing that, studying that structure of the human body and form based upon inspection, what we can see, palpation, we can touch and feel, auscultation, what we hear, and percussion, which is a tapping or like and in tapping you can see things more solid or soft. You may go along, if you know where an organ is and it's fairly superficial, you can actually tap. You'll see doctors and specialists doing such a thing, physical therapists included, tapping, and finding one area is more solid than other parts less solid, and making a determination based upon that. Cadaver dissection, which will be a part of your lab. Obviously, we'll talk about it, but it's really part of your lab mostly. Cutting and separation of tissues to reveal the relationships, right? Comparative anatomy is studying more than one species, as we just mentioned, to compare one species to another to see similarities. We often talk about rats because they're easy to observe, and they have similarities in many ways to the internal structure of humans. Although we can't make exact determinations based upon observing another species, we get some ideas to be pursuing for a future study. And as far as details of function, all the subsets and the function of the body structures, the molecular and cellular level, we have the cardiovascular physiology, which is examining the functioning of the heart, blood vessels and blood, veins, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, and so on. Neurophysiology is basically studying the function of the nerves and nervous system. Respiratory physiology is a functioning of respiratory organs, the lungs, right, and how the lungs affect flow of gases, as well as how passing on of nutrients occurs as a result of that. Reproductive physiology, self-explanatory there, studying the function of reproductive hormones and the reproductive cycle. And then pathophysiology, which is the function of a body system during disease or injury, right, which is unfortunately what most people tend to think of when it comes to the depth of recognition of physiology, but really it's not just when something goes wrong, but understanding the proper functioning so we can help determine what goes wrong and how to solve problems or challenges, which is ultimately the goal, right? That said, this is section 1.1. What you need to be able to check back for yourself is how might knowledge of surface anatomy be important for a healthcare worker during a CPR emergency, like we talked about with auscultation, with percussion, palpation, and so on, observation, what we see. What's the relationship between anatomy and physiology? Understanding we're talking about form and function, that essentially the interconnection between those two sciences and the interrelationship is crucial for our understanding of the body. And of course, what physiology examines how the heart, blood vessels, and blood function. That's a checkpoint. This is all a formative assessment, checking back on yourself, right? It's cardiovascular physiology. You need to make sure you go over this information from the textbook, review the McGraw-Hill as much as you can from the Connect assignments, and this video as necessary. But for now, that is section 1.1.